Good evening and welcome to Trialogue. My name is Ruth White and I'm going to be your host for this evening. I'm going to invite our three fabulous panellists to introduce themselves, starting with Mark, please.
Hi there, I'm Mark Nietzsche. I'm a United Reformed Church minister who's based in North Enfield in London. And I've been here with my wife, Melanie Smith, as ministering to between us 6 churches in the Enfield area for I think it's 2 years this week or next week. I think it's the anniversary of us coming here. So we've been in Enfield now for 2 years, having moved here from Southend.
Thank you, Mark. Patricia.
Hiya, my name's Patricia Colley and I was born and raised in North London. I attend High Cross Church in Tottenham and I am a freelance theatre producer and I work in youth and community projects.
Thank you. And Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan, and at the moment I work for the Archbishop of Canterbury's Housing Commission and JPIT, doing some research on housing and homelessness.
Thank you. So you're all very welcome here. Thank you for agreeing to be part of the panel this evening and to engage in a conversation together. And to our viewers, thank you for being here. This is your programme, and so we're here to serve you. We've got our 3 panellists with their 3 opinions and the one topic that we'll be discussing. We're going to enjoy a short time together and we will explore with and learn from each other during that time. And we really hope that you will be encouraged and challenged by these conversations. And whether you're joining us live tonight or watching later in the week, we hope it is a real blessing to you. So let's start with just a word of prayer. Lord God, your word reminds us that you have not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love. Help us this evening to be inspired again, spurred on in our faith, to go and stand with others and make a difference in our communities and the wider world. Help us to be the people you need us to be, to do the things you have for us to do. Amen.
Amen.
Just a quick reminder, this is your programme, viewers. So along the bottom of the screen, you will see the details of Slido. This is where you can go and post your comments. Please do. You're part of this conversation. And most importantly, post your questions that we will put to the panel live tonight. So we're looking at freedom of conscience, standing up for what you believe in. And we're basing our conversations a little on the book of James, the first 3 chapters of that book. So just briefly to summarise that, James was a disciple of Jesus, and it's believed that this was James, the brother of Jesus, writing this book. And he's one of the pillars of the early church in Jerusalem. He writes a letter here to all of God's people scattered over the world, is the words in the letter. And this writing reminds us of the importance of actions along with faith. It has lots of advice in there on faith and wisdom from above, riches and poverty, good conduct, warning against prejudices, and the power of the tongue. And in particular in James 2, for me, we're reminded that faith without action is dead. It should probably be noted as well that James himself was martyred for his faith and his beliefs. So let's get started. Don't forget to put your comments and questions on Slido. We sent our panellists 3 questions to wrestle with and to get their juices flowing a little on this topic. And so I'm going to post our first question to Mark first. And it was, what are the most important parts of the passage that could teach us about our theme tonight? Mark.
You slightly changed the question there.
You answer whatever question you're hearing.
Well, because part of what it was saying, the bit that I got was, what does it teach us about following our conscience and doing what we believe is right?
Yes.
And when I sort of looked at that or thought about that, I thought actually there's a presumption there in that question that is that our conscience is always right. I don't think that's necessarily the case, because our conscience can be affected by all sorts of different things. And in other parts of the Bible, it talks about sometimes our conscience may be weak, our conscience may be guilty, our conscience may be seared, our conscience could be corrupted, and our conscience can be affected by all sorts of things to do with how we grew up, what happened to us along the way. And it may be helpful just to reflect a little bit in that, you know, one of the things that I was taught growing up was that you always respected authority. And so when a couple of years ago I went to protest against the arms fair, it was quite a sort of threat to me to actually say, well, you know, there was a possibility that I could have been arrested because of protesting. And that my conscience said, actually, you shouldn't get arrested. You shouldn't get arrested. I've grown up all my life trying not to get arrested or trying to be a good person. And so therefore, but actually, if you're wanting to fight for something, you should be willing to encounter that. So, but my conscience was fighting against what I thought or what I believed. But having said that, I mean, I think for me, it's one of the verses that you said there, talking about faith without works is dead. For me, the key part of that James passage is that if you believe something, you should be willing to put that faith into action and get on and do what your belief should be driving you to do. And I think that's one of the most critical things about that whole section of James 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you. Patricia.
Yeah. Can I get the question repeated again so that I can just phrase my words right?
So with James 1 to 3, what are the most important parts of the passage that teach us about following our beliefs?
What I took from the passage was firstly faith and endurance, and then secondly asking in faith, and faith is something that I feel myself personally that I have to feed constantly, and there are moments where I'm not allowing it to grow as it should. And part of my journey with faith was in seeking knowledge and seeking information. There's so much going on societally, and that sinks into so many different aspects of life, that if you're not challenging yourself in those ways and not strengthening yourself, how are you able to grow, and how does that feed yourself as a person, and how does that feed into your faith? So I found those two, faith and endurance and asking in faith, something that I'm still thinking about now. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You really have. Thank you.
Okay.
Dan.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot in this passage about talking, but when we're talking about standing up for our beliefs, it's a bit counterintuitive what it says, because in chapter 1 there's everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Then in chapter 3 there's all sorts of things about how dangerous the tongue is, and how we need to kind of learn to control that tongue. And I mean, I know I used to be a loudmouth on Twitter, an opinion haver, but I've gradually realised kind of how unhelpful that was in standing up for what you believe, because speaking up doesn't mean speaking up all the time. It means talking about the things that actually matter and in a way that matters. And yeah, especially with social media, it can be really tempting not to do it like that. So kind of listen to other people, learn. Those are the first things to do. And then if you've got something new, great, say it. If you're speaking from experience, say it. But too often it's just about, oh, can I have an opinion?
Yeah. Wow.
I think it's very difficult not to just snap back when somebody posts something on social media. You want to respond, and it's something that I've been learning a lot. And I think it's something that is difficult, particularly for younger people to deal with, because you instantly want to respond, but to actually try and step back and think about it before you enter into a discussion, and it's really, really hard, especially when some people say some things which are really offensive.
Yeah.
And also, if I can jump onto that as well, it's sometimes incredibly disheartening when you feel that you might have entered into a conversation where just like, oh yeah, what was I recently? It was to do with oh Lord, how do I put this succinctly? It was to do with history and the way history has been written and the access that people have to information, speaking specifically about Black people and how knowledge is disseminated systematically and not systematically. And some people's opinions who you wish, you know, you were of one mind of, could turn around the 360 and suddenly you're fighting with people you should have a commonality with. But that was with everything you love. If you're into mechanics, if you're into physics, there'll be that one aspect where you're not of one mind with people. And what do you do when those conversations or those thought processes fall apart?
Brilliant. Thank you for bringing social media into it, all three of you, because I think you're absolutely right. It is on the point for a lot of our young people watching and listening. You know, it's a massive part of our lives, and we are called to be evangelists. We're called to make a change. And how do we do that in the digital world is a question worth wrestling with.
I think it's difficult as well when you've got friends encountering with on social media and realizing that actually some of their friends might not be sharing the same views as you, and it's really difficult to talk.
The other thing to bring up with social media is I think we need to learn the power of the retweet button or the reblog or whatever platform you're on. I think too much you end up trying to come up with your own opinion on something, even if you're not particularly experienced in this in that area. You see it, I mean, the worst, it's bad in any case, but the worst case is when you have someone who's not experienced an issue personally who decides to come up with some hot take about it. The big one recently has been Graham Linehan, who has been kind of using a male view of what feminism should be to speak over loads of women and shout at trans women on Twitter. And ultimately, if he just listened to some women on Twitter, perhaps retweeted them, then we'd get a much more effective way of doing things. So yeah, use that retweet button a lot more, use the tweeting a lot less.
This is brilliant stuff, guys. I want to remind the people watching that we're interested in their answers to these questions as well. So do write them on Slido and send them in so that we can hear what you're thinking and join in with your conversations. Send in your questions as well for these panelists. We're going to go on to the second question that we posed, which is a flip of the first, really. So the question was, and it's to you first, Dan, what are the most challenging, I feel like we're already talking about some of these, but what are the most challenging or difficult parts of the passage for Christians to apply, perhaps generally or in lockdown?
So I guess there's so much that's challenging in here. Whether it's that kind of not speaking, not being angry, that's really challenging. But I think the most difficult thing for me is the section in chapter 2 on prejudice. So it starts by saying, "My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others?" I think the trouble is it's impossible not to be prejudiced, but we still have to work on it. Prejudice just rears its head anywhere, even if we don't mean it to. It's not just about hating a group, but it's also about respecting them enough to learn how to make their lives more comfortable. The example that I have is I'm a member of the Labour Party. We've struggled with anti-Semitism over the last few years. And the thing about anti-Semitism is it isn't just a hatred of Jews. although that obviously unfortunately happens. It's also for those who kind of can't be bothered to learn the tropes which have always been used through history to make Jewish people feel uncomfortable. So really, if you want to combat prejudice, you have to be always learning why these tropes make people uncomfortable and then stop using them. Because some of these kind of in themselves, they don't sound like they should be offensive. You might think, well, I would say that to someone else, but you need to understand the context, and you're never going to get to a place where you're perfect on that. But if we're going to stop favouring some people over others, then we really need to work as hard as we can to learn those.
That was similar to what you were saying, Patricia, about knowing the history. Would you like to come in on at this point, Patricia, with that question? What the most challenging and difficult part?
The most challenging, I found for myself, the most challenging was, I think it's chapter 1, where it talks about never doubting. It says, but ask in faith, never doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Can you imagine? Don't imagine. You're not getting anything if you're doubting. We're inherently doubtful creatures. And it's sort of, for me, I was, I think the 3 things that popped up for this one, and they're not necessarily linked, but, doubt maybe is linked. Doubt and temptation. If it's not God who tempts, then who does? Who allows temptation? And then there's the temptation by one's own desire as well. So, yeah. I think really that one is a big one for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark, what did you?
I quite like the doubting, Patricia. I think it's brilliant because I like arguing back, and the second verse in James 1 is the one where I love arguing with it, because he says, consider it nothing but joy when you trials. What nutter would write that, for goodness sake? I mean, so I'm quite happy to argue with the Bible. I'm afraid I have to, because it's not, how can you show joy if you're under trial, you're going through a testing time? And I think probably lots of people perhaps watching this or joining us are going through that at the moment. People have been stuck in their own homes for months at the moment, or not being able to do things. And is that supposed to be, you're supposed to be happy about that, are you? I'm sorry. I think we need to argue something. And I think God's quite happy. I think God can cope. Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that is important for us to do, is to actually, it's not about not having doubts, it's about actually sharing those doubts with God and with our we're on the journey with. Because if we can't share our doubts with other people, I don't know who we can share them with. It's really difficult.
Yeah. Okay, we have a comment coming actually, just to share with you. Someone's saying they really like the point about the retweet button. So we're all learning something tonight. And we should think about how we can use this to listen and amplify marginalized voices and those with lived experience. So I think we've really touched on something there. Feel free to go further with that conversation.
I just wonder whether we sometimes hold opinions and experiences as kind of equal to one another too much. I think I often come across the idea of, oh, are you saying that I can't have an opinion on this because I'm a white man or whatever? And no one's saying that. Absolutely no one's saying that. The thing is that the opinions are valid, but I guess experiences are the things we need to be listening to, because that's where you really find the problems. Everyone's kind of had some good time in the shower and had a great idea of how they could change the world. They've come out and they've thought, great, I'm going to tweet that. And ultimately, that's great. I'm sure you've had a fun time thinking, I'm going to get lots of likes for this. But is that really as helpful as someone who's actually experienced it? Yeah.
Yeah. We have had a question, if I can put this viewer's question to the three of you. It says, what do you think are the most important issues that the church and our society should be speaking out on at the moment? What are the most important issues that the church and our society should be speaking out on at the moment? And that's the question that our viewers can send in their answers to as well. Have some thinking time and then feel free to jump in.
Where do you start?
I think that's the question, isn't it? What are the most is prioritising issues.
I think for me, it's about the structural things. I think one of the things I think you asked us to think about a little bit was, where you see the church working things through. And I think, the church is doing a lot of great things in, the food banks that we've set up and things like that. But I think there is a bigger issue in that we are not dealing with the causes. We're quite good at responding to the needs in local communities. So, we know that people are struggling and to make ends meet, and that this is going to be a bigger problem over the months ahead. And therefore we it's good to set up a food bank. We can get donations from people within our churches. We can put that forward. But actually, the issue is, why have we got food banks? And I think sometimes we as a church and JPIT, which I think Dan's working with, they're doing a great job at trying to put those issues up front, in front of people's perspectives. I know a couple of years ago on Easter Sunday, JPIT released a report on poverty, which that actually did hit the headlines, but it takes so much effort to actually get that message out there. And we are generally ignored. We're generally ignored.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties into a point, which is that we need to almost bridge the gap between the systematic and the local. I think perhaps there's a tendency to leave it up to JPITs to do the campaigning, the kind of trying to change the systems, and then churches are going to focus on responding to issues. But actually, churches can respond in a really kind of preventative, systemic way as well, whether that's campaigning on a local issue or addressing something before it becomes a problem. So because I work on homelessness, one of the things that I've seen churches doing is things like offering tenancy deposits to people so that they don't end up on the street, or offering them advice on their benefits. Again, it kind of makes sure that people don't get there in the first place, rather than just doing the night shelter type things.
Yeah. Dan, can you point the viewers to JPIT if it's something that's new to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Joint Public Issues Team, or JPIT, is a body that works with 4 denominations, so the URC, the Baptists, the Methodists, and the Church of Scotland. And basically the idea is that we have fairly similar views on social issues, and we have more of a good effect on politics if we work together. It's quite interesting seeing the difference between working with the COV, where they're a big old church, and they have bishops in the laws and things like that, and then working through JPIT. But there's something really interesting about JPIT's role, because it's really connected to a lot of local churches as well. And so if we all work together, individual churches and the church as a big institution, 4 big institutions, then yeah, we can really change something.
So that's something that if a young person hasn't come across it in their local church, they can take this back to their local church and say, we need to be listening and getting involved. Patricia, would you like to come in on this? The question. Sorry.
No, go on.
The question. What's the most important?
I think I do agree with finding out the roots to the causes, roots to issues, and if I, like, for example, if I'm relating it to the work I do and work around participation, there's different ways of interacting with communities. I mean, one is parachuting in, doing something and then leaving. the community have no way of lengthening that engagement. There's no way of things haven't been put through structurally to help things like it flourish. But if you're going about it the right way, you should be going in and finding the needs of the community. You should be asking about what needs to be done, how you can connect, what other ways they're connecting with other people. It's the focus of it needs to be genuine, and people sorry, the focus of it needs to be genuine, and the people who you're wanting to help, or the needs that have come up, there needs to be addressed from the grassroots level.
Right.
And sometimes that's forgotten in policy or the way we do things or whatever. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another question is, are all Christians called to do this? Or is it just a calling on a few? I think we're probably thinking about those who are called to go quite far with their standing up and being counted. Is it a calling on all of us, or just a few?
That really ties into something I was thinking about after the last question. The faith without deeds being dead thing really it's something I struggle with, because you can't kind of give your time and energy to every cause, and it kind of makes me think, if you kind of applied it in a broader way than what it meant, that if you don't take action on, say, refugees, then you don't care about that cause. And I think what both of these questions kind of highlight is that we're all called to have our own kind of place within God's kingdom, and to do what we feel called to do, what we're good at doing, and what we care about. It doesn't mean that we don't think that other things are important, or don't care about them at all. It's just saying we have these priorities. So I think we're probably all called to do something that's socially minded, but I think that could be more basic ministry, more kind of traditional ministry, or it could be social action, however you define that.
Thank you. Patricia or Mark?
Could you come back to me? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. You don't have to answer every question either.
All right.
We can have thinking time.
All right.
Mark?
I mean, I think we have to be concerned about everything. I think at the same time, though, that we have to take care of ourselves and look after ourselves. And so we have to recognise that we cannot do everything. But yeah, I mean, I just constantly feel that there's different things keep coming up, and it does feel like you're sort of firefighting everywhere. But there's so many different issues. And I think it's things, as well, I think if you just are open to God and say, God, just use me where you think my skills and my gifts are best used, and then find out and see what happens. But I remember a couple of years ago when it's 5 years ago now, when the refugee crisis first hit Europe. It wasn't a crisis till it hit Europe, by the way, just in case you wondered. The fact that we had billions of refugees all over the world, it was a crisis till it hit Europe. But that tells you something of itself as well. But we, in Southend, where we were at the time, we started to sort of be trying to work with groups that were working with the refugees. And we got quite a lot of bad press from in the local papers saying, oh, we've got to help people in England first. We can't just help everybody. And unfortunately, they picked on the wrong group, because the churches in Southend actually had homeless shelters set up and running as well. So the churches were doing both, and they were dealing with the homeless issue as well as dealing with the refugees. So there was absolutely, nothing that people could throw at us, because they could see we were doing both, and sometimes that's the case. But we can't do in some ways we can't do everything. I think we do have a calling to respond to whatever we find we're called to respond to.
You're saying exactly what someone's just sent in. Actually, if I read you their comment, they say, "Is there an issue? Is there an issue sometimes that we are bombarded with issues, that we choose to do nothing, or we forget once the next thing comes along?" And I think it is an issue. We've got the question that comes off of that: how do we avoid being tokenistic in our responses? It's a multiple question. This goes. What are some of the bad practices we should be aware of and avoid when we try to tackle issues? I think they were almost answering their own question there. I like it when people do that.
There's a lovely word. There's a lovely word I came across a couple of years ago, which is slacktivism. Slacktivism, which is basically that it's so easy just to click like or to share something on social media, and actually, it not really meaning anything. And it's interesting, earlier in this year, I was at the JPIC conference in Derby, and the Labour MP, I can't remember his name there, Dan might remember.
Barry Gardiner.
Yeah, he was just saying that, he said, for goodness sake, don't sign these change.org petitions and all these other things. He said his MPs are just fed up with them because they get so many of them now that they actually don't respond. And he said, which is what we were talking about before we came on air, is he said, just write a letter to your MP, actually handwrite a letter. He said that they will take notice of that much more than any of the petitions that you sign. And that was fascinating to hear.
And we have time in lockdown to be writing letters about what we're bothered about.
Yeah.
Dan or Patricia?
I in response to that question, I think it's partially to do with what resonates with you. I think it's difficult sometimes. It's difficult sometimes, or even as you're figuring it out, maybe as a young person, definitely not as a young person as well, to be committed to things and to say, okay, I'm going to dedicate my time to finding out more about these and how it influences and affects different parts of my life. So it's sometimes allowing yourself to have the time and being kind to yourself and being, I'm of this world. I want to take part of this world. I can't interact at this moment the way I want to. Maybe what's stopping me? Let me have that time to reflect, and then you can grow, and then you can build, and then you can say, yeah, I'm going to put my attention and my purpose towards something. So yeah, definitely allow something to resonate with you, and it's okay if it takes a while to build up.
Brilliant, thank you. Dan, do you want to come in on that one?
It just reminds me of a conversation we had in JPIT the other day, actually, which was based around kind of, should we be saying something just because we think we should be saying something, or should we be saying something because we've got something to contribute? I suppose that's kind of the point I was making earlier. But yeah, I think you really need to think, how can I genuinely add to doing something good, not just virtue signal. I think, yeah, it comes down to really listening to the group you're trying to help. So whether it's on kind of poverty, listening to people who've experienced poverty, and do what they ask you to do, rather than just do what you think, oh, this will be helpful. Well, actually listen. I think that's the best way to stop it being tokenistic.
As you said earlier, don't just speak for them, but enable them to speak.
Yeah.
If you've been given a platform, give it to them.
Yeah.
I found that really helpful. Thank you. So keep your comments and questions coming in. We haven't got much longer, so it'd be really good for that time to be about your questions and your comments. But while they come, I'm going to put the third question to the panel. This was, where do you see the church being a positive influence on the world? So perhaps some examples that you know of where churches are standing up for issues and trying to make a difference. This could be individuals, it could be something absolutely slight, like writing a letter to your MP, or it could be something massive that you want to give the platform to this evening. So who would like to start first? Very polite. Go on, Mark.
All over the place. I think some things, I think something, churches are involved in various different ways. So, I mean, I can only speak about some of our experience over the last couple of years here in Enfield to probably help. So one of the issues that was highlighted is that there is quite a debt problem. I think that's only going to get worse. So at the moment, we're working with the other churches in Enfield to try and set up a Enfield Churches Debt Centre. So we're working on that. The other side of that is we're working with CAP, Christians Against Poverty, in that. But because of the pressures that they're under with dealing with debt all over the country, they are unable to help us to train anybody to be able to take the role of managing this centre till at least November, because they're under so much pressure. That in itself tells its own story in terms of the issue with debt that there is in the country at the moment, which is frightening. But another thing that came up in one of my elders meetings recently is that because of what's happening with COVID-19 at the moment, we have no homeless on the streets in Enfield at present. They've all been put in accommodation. They're all in bed and breakfast or in hotels. And so I have got people in my church saying, well, what can we do to make sure this continues somehow? Because as soon as we come out fully out of lockdown, all that funding that's been put there is going to disappear, and we'll have people on the streets again. And we shouldn't have that. We don't need to have it. Now, I know that there are some homeless who would want to be on the street, whatever you did, but there are an awful lot that would like to have a bed each night to go back to. How come we can solve what is perceived to be a crisis or a problem 1 minute, and then 5 minutes later we can't? And there's something there about values and what we perceive as being important. And we may have opportunities over the next few weeks to actually try and influence those that do make the decisions as to what we think is important.
Thank you. Dan or Patricia?
I think we can see the church living out this passage. I think probably similar to what Mark has said, in that finding out what is most at need in the society around you, and where your church you wish it should be embedded, or you wish to be embedded in, and that could be maybe in some pre-existing projects that you're already running, or it could be in that opportunity to reach out to organisations that are already doing the work. Things don't happen out of a vacuum. People are already doing the work. Link with them, build with them. So that's how I think it could go.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I've been really lucky in the job that I've done over the last year. A lot of my time has been spent kind of visiting churches that are doing great stuff. I've visited about 30 churches around the country, doing stuff on housing and homelessness over the last year. And there's just some amazing stuff going on. And there's always that kind of prevention stuff that I'm really interested in, because we don't hear about churches doing that as much. I think the area of prevention that kind of talks to what we're saying today is churches that are doing community organising. Because again, it's about that amplifying people's voices. If people don't know, the model of kind of community organising within churches is you're basing stuff around conversations with members of your congregation and people outside your church, one-to-one conversations where you just get to know what people care about, what issues they face. And then after a while, you gradually build up a picture of the big issues in your area. And then you start campaigning on those issues together. And that's a really empowering thing. So there was a church in Ealing that's been doing this. I've been joined by a cat. There was a church in Ealing that was doing this, and they managed to get their council to commit to raising the affordability to 50% on all new developments, which is a really high amount, and run renters' rights workshops, and even start something called a community land trust. So just because of this kind of relational approach, listening and then amplifying the voices of the people who actually have experienced the issues within the congregation, they use the power, the kind of name of the church and the community within the church to change stuff for good. So yeah, churches are doing amazing stuff.
And we know that many churches are. There's a comment come in. My church, apart from supporting food bank, Christian Aid, etc., isn't really campaigning about anything. It's very hard when it's just me, this young person is saying. So how can I start trying to raise awareness of other issues to the congregation? I think that'd be a really helpful advice, actually, from the majority of people watching. Would you like me to repeat it? How can I start trying to raise awareness of other issues to the congregation? Do you have any advice or experience that you could share on that one?
I wonder if this young person has any support within the church or wider youth group or other URC churches, or maybe not other URC churches, can work into denominationally as well. I don't know, is there anything you can recommend in terms of support?
I think well, there's loads. I mean, any young person can talk to their children and youth development officer in their synod for a start, and we would actively try and feed them back within their local area and find, as you say, Patricia, elements of support. So I think that's a really good place to start, those advice to the young person writing this. Is there anyone else, as Patricia says, that could already be a support to you? That could add weight to your voice and perhaps support you and pray for you as you go and take this to your eldership. A SIDO in that area could definitely support a young person who felt that they were not being listened to in their church. But I think all the other
and young person, don't get it twisted. Your voice is very weighty. It's just that the other people who are not listening need to get their ears unclogged. Your voice is weighty. Sometimes people like to see people come in groups.
Yeah, your voice is weighty.
I think also Google community organizing that I just mentioned, because a lot of the things within that is about finding the ways to make things appeal to other people within your community. So it doesn't have to be that your church is on board with this. Look at those techniques. A lot of it is kind of saying, actually, what are the things that this person cares about and how can we work that into the activism that you want to do? And gradually talking to more and more people in your church about it, hopefully you can build up a picture of how your church can have a better voice.
Thank you. There's another question that's come in, Mark, so forgive me for not coming to you on that one. It probably a nice one to close on, actually, unless more questions came. The question is, it's quite personal to you. Is there a particular issue that each panelist feel called to speak out and campaign on? So I guess it's, what are you passionate about at the moment? What is resonating with you, to use Patricia's words from earlier? Who would like to go first? Go on, Mark. I took the mic away from you earlier.
No, that's fine. Unfortunately for me, I just think there's just so many issues that they're fighting on. We've been involved with a refugee situation recently, and I think the thing that winds me up most in some ways is that people make comments when they don't know the detail, and I recommend people just find out as much as they can about any particular issue. So, for example, one of the things that we've had an encounter with over the last 4 years or so is that, which people don't know about, is that there are people in the UK who have no recourse to public funding. So there are people who actually get no money each week. And then there are, if you look at asylum seekers, they get an amount of money per week given to them, and everybody says, oh, there's money being wasted. And yet actually it's an amount of money, I think it's something like 56 quid a week or something like that, that they're supposed to survive on. I don't know how people can do that. And, you know, there's in the last couple of months, we've had people contacting us who are on benefits, and they're expected to live off, I think it works out at £100 a month once they take out the rent that they're having to pay. And so there's just injustice in so many different places. And so that's why I'm sort of saying, partly I've got fingers in different pies and are trying to fight on many different fronts. There's not really one particular thing that I'm passionate about at the moment. There's just lots of, I mean, I mentioned earlier the arms trade, stuff like that. And again, there's short-sightedness in that we export to various places in the world. We export we send weapons or sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia then bombs Yemen, and then we launch an appeal for famine relief in Yemen. Like, hang on a sec, if you didn't sell the weapons to the countries that are then bombing them, you wouldn't have that problem down the line. So there's so many, I think that's partly one of the things I think Patricia picked up earlier, is that quite often there's interrelated. Once you start looking at one particular thing, find it's linked into something else, and it's linked into something else. And again, you know, I remember I was involved when I was down in Dorset with the food bank, and you suddenly found, once you started with the food bank, you suddenly found that you got a phone call saying, oh, there's a lady with a child, single mum, who's just been given a flat. She hasn't got a fridge. She hasn't got a microwave. So you suddenly became stepped on some, because you had to sort of be, I'm probably talking way before any of your ages, but, you know, the garage that I had down in Dorset was full of bits and pieces, which then came in and a few days later went out again. So because people had needs, and those things grew.
Thank you. Patricia, what do you feel called to speak out or campaign on at the moment?
I don't feel like I'm ready to campaign, because I still have a bit more research to do so that I can speak competently, if that makes sense. Yeah. But there's yeah, I agree. There's a lot of things that have piqued my interest. Recently, systematic racism, big brand corporations, and again, their links with other companies, and oh, it's so much. So I think I need to just get on to and concentrate on one thing. So that's me at the moment.
It can get overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I still apologise, Patricia.
No, that's all right.
Dan.
I guess for me it's sustainability at the moment, partly because it's the thing that's easiest to forget right now, whether it's kind of people giving up using reusable cups because of problems with that, or people taking to their cars because there are problems with public transport. It's just something we really need to push. But also there are, we've got a kind of change over now, and we need to make sure that when we're doing this changeover, when we're building back better. So the combination of the pessimism on one side and the optimism on the other sides means that that's the thing that I'm interested in right now.
And it's probably a good point to remind viewers that some of those things you've already mentioned have already been talked about briefly within a trialogue, and you can re-watch those. They're still on YouTube. I know we did creation and sustainability recently, and we're looking at legacies of slavery in about 3 weeks. Patricia, it might be worth getting you back for that one. So I'm going to pose the question right back at the people watching, really. So you've heard from our panelists this evening, but what is it that is resonating with you? What is it that you're passionate about at the moment? What is it that is keeping you awake? What do you feel God is asking of you at this time? Is it to be more aware, to build up your knowledge base? Or are you ready to start putting legs on your prayers, perhaps, and going and making a difference in some small or large way? The URC is a great place to be for social action and for issue-based ministry. I'm a Baptist, I work for the URC, and I'm absolutely bowled over by the young people in the URC. So just know that, as Patricia said earlier, your voice matters and it does carry weight. And there are people around you that can support you. Panelists, thank you so much for this evening. I've got a lot from it, and I'm sure our viewers have, both tonight and over the weeks to come. Next week, so that you all know, we will be thinking about decision making within the church, and the host will be Phil Ray, Claire Downing, Morag McClintock and Nick Booth will be on the panel that week. Don't forget, this is your programme, so send in your topics. What is it that you would like us to debate, discuss, converse about and wrestle with you? So all that being said, thank you for tonight, and I'm going to ask Mark to close in prayer before we say our final goodbyes. Thank you, Mark.
So let's pray. Transforming God, change our hearts and minds so that we turn to you. Help us to be open to hear your voice. Open our eyes to see where you are at work, and help us to respond as we are able. Be with us, guide us, keep us safe in your love this day and evermore. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Mark, Patricia, Dan. It's been inspirational, it's been challenging, and it's given us food for thought. So carry on reading James 1 to 3, wrestle with it, and don't forget what Mark said, we're allowed to question as we wrestle. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and see you again next week. Goodbye.